All right, so we'll get started. Anyway, again, welcome. And first of all, I want to say congratulations to everyone because we worked hard together. It got a little contentious and I think a little more challenging than we had anticipated to get Amendment 1 passed, but we did it. And in fact, we had 66% of the voters in Virginia approved Amendment 1. So give yourselves a hand. We did a really great job. So the hard part is over. That meant over 2,700,000 Virginians said this was a good idea to have a bipartisan redistricting commission for Virginia. So things are happening fast since the election. As you probably know, or if you don't know, I'm just going to kind of run down what's been happening and what's going to happen in the next couple of months. So the selection committee of 5 retired Circuit Court justices was selected. They met last Wednesday. They set up some future dates and they kind of refined the application and talked about that a lot. Some of you, I think, listened in on their meetings. So remember, all these meetings are going to be open to the public. So it's great that we can kind of tune in. I was very impressed that they seemed very serious about their responsibilities for this process to move forward well. And very impressed by that. So today, we should know who the 8 legislative members of the commission will be. I believe at least 4 of the names have been published. Julia or Sarah, if you want to mention the 4, you can do that if people are interested.
Well, so far, oh, Sarah, did you want to go ahead? All right, so far we know that on the commission will be delegates Marcus Simon from Falls Church, Dolores McQuinn. We just, gosh, the Republican caucus just announced its members. And of course,
it was Les Adams and Margaret Ransone.
Right.
This just in, breaking news.
All right. And are they delegates?
Yes.
They're also
okay,
delegates.
so we haven't heard any of the senators listed.
I don't believe we've seen the formal announcement.
Yeah, okay, so that should be coming out today. Yesterday, the actual application process for citizen members of the commission opened up. So I think we have Julia put in the link to the Department of Legislative Services website that has all things to do with redistricting there. So you can find the application there. It explains what the requirements are and what the disqualifications are. So if you or anyone you know is interested in possibly applying for the commission, please direct them there. The applications will be taken for the next 4 weeks. The last day, I believe, will be Monday, December 28th. So it's a pretty quick process. Once all those applications are in, the Department of Legislative Services then prepares them, sends the list of all the applicants, and we hope there will be many, to the 4 leaders of the General Assembly, who then have to turn around within 3 days to submit lists of 16 or more of those citizen applicants to the selection committee, which has scheduled meetings, I think, for January 5th, 6th, 7th. So at that time, they will meet, they will review all the applications, they will select 2 citizen applicants from each of the 4 lists, and that will complete the commission. Then by February.
Chris,
yes.
I could have a comment about the application since I've looked at it through. I can wait until you're done if you want.
Okay. I looked at it briefly and it looks fairly straightforward and user-friendly. What do you think?
Yeah, just so people know what to expect. It's sort of a downloadable PDF that you can store, and then I think it's sent in by email. You can also do it by fax or mail if you want to. And something to keep in mind is the justice accepted the requirement for 3 letters of recommendation. So depending on applying, you should probably put those in the works. And one of the things that's interesting, they actually decided to flip the application, so a lot of the disqualifying questions are up front, so people would realize, you know, if they would be disqualified right away. You kind of review your volunteer activities and activities for the past 3 years, And then at the end, the judges added an open-ended question about why do you want to be on the commission, which I think was kind of a good idea. The other thing, actually, you're asked if you participated in a primary in a particular year, and I had to go back and actually remember whether there was a Democratic primary. I actually checked my voting record on the State Department of Elections website and did not think it was accurate in terms of voting in the primary in 2019. So I made a note of that. But anyway, that gives you a little bit of a sense of what to expect.
Okay, thanks. So by February 1st, the commission will have to have its first meeting, and that again will be open to the public. At that time, they'll set forth, when they're going to have open meetings in different parts of the state. At least 3 will be required. And they will have to decide how they're going to accept input from the public, et cetera. And of course, the census, once the census data is received by the state, we're not sure yet when that's going to be because that's still up in the air. It could be that they will follow the usual timelines, which is delivering the census data to the president on December 31st. And then we would get the information in the state level in the spring, but it could be delayed. But once that happens, then the commission will have 45 days to send maps to the General Assembly for approval, 60 days for the congressional maps. Part of that process will be getting input from the public. And one item will be the communities of interest, and that's why we're here today. So Senate Bill 717 and HB House Bill 1255 define communities of interest as the following. Districts shall be drawn to preserve communities of interest. For purposes of this subdivision, a community of interest means a neighborhood or any geographically defined group of people living in an area who shares similar social, cultural, and economic interests. A community of interest does not include a community based upon political affiliation or relationship with a political party, elected official, or candidate for office. So that's the actual language that's in the code. So our primary purpose today is to find out more about what a community of interest is and how this app created by Representable, which is part of the Princeton Gerrymandering Project, can help you as individuals and community groups throughout Virginia to define and draw a map of their own community of interest. This is one of at least 2 apps or tools that we know of that will be available to the public. We'll let you know about others later. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Jason Rode of the Princeton Gerrymandering Project.
Hi, everybody. Glad to see so many people on the call. We're delighted to be here as always. It's no secret that Virginia's been doing amazing work. And in a year that saw a lot of ballot initiatives unfortunately fail due to coronavirus, I will say that the amendment pass has been just a beacon of hope for all of us. The league began to expand democracy in America, and we're certainly hoping it will expand democracy in Virginia and elsewhere. As I said, my name is Jason. I was previously with Congresswoman McBath. I joined the Princeton Gerrymandering Project about a year ago. I handle outreach and logistics. We work primarily in 3 fields. One is math and data. We analyze gerrymandered maps, look at certain metrics. We can point out whether a place is gerrymandered. We collect a list of precincts and electoral maps. We also use our legal team to analyze reforms, to propose model legislation, and to lobby, well, advocate for them in state, local governments. And then we have an outreach section where we build networks of folks in multiple states. And one of the things that we also do is this Representable tool, which we're very excited by. It's been in development for 2 years. It's been put together by an amazing group of Princeton engineers, the director of which is Hal Barnes, who I'll turn it over to now.
Great, thank you, Jason. So hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be speaking with you all about Representable today. I'm here with Michaela Parnell and Michaela Daniel, who are 2 members of our team. We've been working on this project, as Jason mentioned, for a couple years, really developing the technology, but also the policy side of things, the law side of things, and trying to make this as easy to use and accessible as possible. Because we want to put communities on the map and give communities a voice. And Virginia is one of our priority states for that because we know that this is an excellent opportunity to make sure that communities are heard. So on that note, I'm going to hand it over to Michaela Parnell, one of our outreach coordinators, who will introduce the tool and show you all a little bit about what Representable can do.
Thanks, Kyle. So as you mentioned, I'm Michaela Parnell. Okay, as you mentioned, I'm Michaela Parnell. I'm one of the outreach coordinators for Representable. And I'm really excited to be here with you guys today to show you a little bit about the tool, how it works, and what Representable is kind of meant to do. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started on the presentation. Also, feel free if you have any questions to leave them in the chat and I'll be able to answer them there. Okay, so can everyone see my screen? Good. Okay, awesome. So let me go ahead and click present. Okay, so as it was mentioned, we're Representable. We have this tool. It's a open source free web tool website that is used to draw these maps of communities of interest in the hopes of fighting gerrymandering by empowering communities to kind of give their own personal input in the redistricting process. So what we're doing, right, we've created this mapping tool. It's meant to help communities, like I said, get representation that they deserve through public input. The tool is free, it's open source, and it's accessible for anyone to use. Additionally, who we are, Representable is built by a team of engineers, lawyers, policy experts, organizational partners, and we're growing fast. We built this tool in partnership with the Princeton Gerrymandering Project, as well as Schmidt Futures. And how we're doing this is we're working with different states and different organizations within those states. We're currently in 9+ states. We're constantly working on using our feedback that we get from organizations to improve the website and make it more accessible to more people. And currently we have 10+ organizational partners that we get that feedback from. And our goal is to work really closely with these organizations to foster data collection. We're a pretty small team. We're don't have the manpower to spread into every state and spread this tool everywhere. So we really rely on organizations to help us to get the word out about Representable and get into communities and have them draw their communities of interest. So just a little bit more about what our purpose is. Over 26 states have legal requirements to respect communities of interest during redistricting. However, there aren't really any working methods to collect that community of interest data easily from people who actually live in these communities. So that's the, I guess, niche that Representable is trying to fill. So our goal is to be able to deliver this community of interest data to map drawers using a very easy and standardized format. And in doing this, we hope that it's going to enable better public testimony by individuals and also by organizations like yours. So this is just a little bit of information about redistricting in Virginia. I'm sure you guys know more about redistricting in Virginia than I do. And Chris has already kind of gone over some of this, but essentially the bottom line is that now Virginia is required to consider communities of interest, to have protections for communities of interest in their redistricting process, which is how Representable can be used in Virginia. So a little bit more about what communities of interest are more broadly. A community of interest is a geographic area that shares cultural, historic, or economic interests. So communities of interest kind of encourage drawing more fair voting districts by taking into account the kinds of people in these communities and what they have in common before we kind of split them up with these districts. So I've included like a whole bunch of examples here, but just to name a few, one potential example might be a campus. So for example, University of North Carolina, Asheville, one campus and the people who work there, the people who go to school there, they may be considered community of interest because they have a lot of shared economic interests. They go to the same places to do things. They spend a lot of time together or pass each other frequently. Those are things that might constitute a community of interest, but that doesn't have to be the only thing that makes a community of interest. For example, agriculture could be a really great marker of community of interest. A group of dairy farmers or wheat farmers or whatever product, if a whole group of people are kind of producing the same product in the same area, maybe they find that they have very similar interests and would consider themselves to be one community. So there's a lot of different examples of what could potentially make a community of interest. And later when we go over the demo, I will go through a little bit more in depth how you could go about kind of designing or thinking about your community of interest when you're trying to draw it on a map. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to give a few examples of communities of interest that have not been respected or not considered in the mapping process before I show you how our tool kind of tries to fix this or tries to address this. So my first example here is the University of North Carolina, Asheville. So some of you may know that North Carolina created their congressional district maps in 2010 and in 2011, the Supreme Court ruled that these maps were actually racially gerrymandered, so they were not allowed to be used. So after that, they had to redraw the maps, and this map that you're seeing on the screen here is actually the map that they drew in 2016. And so just looking at it, you can already tell there's some kind of funky things going on that doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you look into it more closely, you'll see that this new map is actually still pretty partisan and disregards a lot of communities of interest. For example, one that really stuck out to people was in this picture here. You're seeing a picture of actually a dorm room or a dorm building in University of North Carolina, Asheville's campus. And as you can see, like this corner area of the dorm is in District 11 and the other parts of the dorm are in District 10. So you'd probably consider that people who live in literally the same dorm buildings share a lot of interests and have a lot of things in common, but they would be voting to completely different districts. So obviously this is an example that communities of interest were not considered or even were respected in this case. So what was done about this? Multiple federal judges did deem that map also unconstitutional. However, it didn't go through all the way. So these maps are actually still used in the 2018 election cycle in North Carolina. And I've included a little bit of a quote here about this map in particular from the Democratic State Representative Grier Martin, who said, "That confusion, I think, really affects the willingness of voters to participate in the political process. The constant shuffling of districts further erodes the public's faith." And I definitely think this is true. I'm from North Carolina, and as a lot of you know, North Carolina is a swing state. So how these lines are drawn and how people show up to vote was really important because it has a lot of, I guess, weight or pull in the state, and every vote really counts. And every vote counts in every state, right? So we want to make sure that these lines are drawn responsibly and fairly to them. So I have one more example for you, and this one's actually in Virginia. And again, you guys probably know more about Virginia than I do. However, this one I think is pretty obvious to everyone. This was in Prince William County, Virginia. And so this is Virginia's only majority minority county. It has a substantial Latinx population. And it was split 5 to 8 times in a proposed state legislative district plan. So obviously, again, this is an example of a community being pretty egregiously split when it seems like they would have a lot in common or be, in some ways, have communities of interest that overlap in this area. And so then here's another quote from the NAACP president, Ralph Smith, which says, "This plan effectively disenfranchises Prince William County. We are concerned that the minority voice will be lost." So this is what Representable is really hoping to address. We're trying to fight back against the system of gerrymandering by providing data that allows people to really show where their communities are. And we hope that in enabling them to do this, they can kind of fight back against things like in North Carolina and like in Virginia, where they're clearly being split apart, but maybe they don't have the data to back up why they should be together. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give a bit of a live demo. So I'm going to switch the page to our Representable website and show you how, as a user or as an organization, you could go through the website. So go ahead and switch over. So what you're looking at now, or what I hope you're looking at now, is the homepage for Representable. So this is what anyone would see when they first go to the Representable website. And what you're going to do is just go straight to get started. It's going to show you this picture of a map, and then you'll pick your state and get started. So I'm going to show you guys my community in North Carolina and how I would go about drawing it. But we have functionality in all of the states, so anyone would be able to use this. So I'm going to go ahead and select North Carolina. Okay, so as you can see here, what you're going to be taken to first is a bit of a state page, and this is just giving you some information on what is redistricting, what it might look like in your state, what Representable is for, so some of the things that I've explained already. We have a little bit of information about the redistricting criteria in North Carolina, and then information about communities of interest. And this is something that you would see on every state and is tailored specifically to that state. So I'm going to go straight to Draw My Community to show you a bit of what the survey page might look like. So this is our survey page here. This is where, I guess, the bread and butter of the website, right? This is where you would go to actually create your community and submit it. So I'm going to take you through step by step and just show you how you might go about creating this community. So the first thing it's going to ask you is for a little bit of identifying information. So it's going to ask for your name, and then it's going to ask you for an address here. So I'll just put that in there. And then the next part of the survey is going to actually be about your community's shared interests. So as you can see here, it's asking you kind of some pointed questions about a few different things: your economic interests, community activities and services, cultural or historic interests, and then finally other interests and concerns in your community. So each of these sections do have some questions that are meant to guide you on how you would answer it, and also have some examples of things that you may consider as a part of your community. So just off the top of my head though, some examples for economic interests, maybe you would want to include popular industries in your community, or really important industries in your community. Maybe there are certain companies that hire like a lot of people in the area, you know, a lot of people that work there. So that might be something that you would include in economic interests. Or perhaps you would include a shared environment that a lot of people have in this economic interest section. So I'm going to go for my community. I've kind of typed a bit of a response here, and then I will explain how I kind of came to this response. So I live in Wilmington, North Carolina. So I live right on the coast by the beach. So one thing that I said was really important economically in my community is tourism. We have a lot of small businesses, and they're especially active around the summer. We also have a lot of businesses that actually close during the winter and only open during the summer. So that's how I kind of know that tourism is a big, big deal. Additionally, I said that the hospital/medical system and big companies like GE and PPD are really big hirers in my town. So a lot of people work there. I said that I would categorize the majority of my community as middle class, and the types of neighborhoods in my community are pretty suburban. So those are some things that I might think are important economic interests that bind my community together. So next I'm going to go community activities and services. So this is kind of some examples might be churches, malls, school districts, community centers, parks, anything that you can think of that people gather around or socialize in, or, you know, get some type of service from. So I'm going to go ahead and put in my answer here as well. So for this, I've included my church, Port City. It's one of the larger churches within my community. It hosts a lot of events for the community and fundraisers and different things like that. Additionally, I said that Independence Mall and the surrounding shops are ones that people in my community visit frequently. So I would consider that to be a pretty big part of my community. A lot of people gather there. I included Longleaf Park. That's a really big park near my community. A lot of people run there. A lot of people take their kids there. So that's a central spot. As well as two major schools, Rolling Grice and Hoggard. One's a middle school and one's a high school, and they both host a lot of activities. And then finally, I said that we're located in between two major beaches. So a lot of local businesses are in my community, and also people like to visit the beach pretty frequently. So those are some examples of activities and services in my community. Our third example is cultural or historic interests. So these are things that are like foster a sense of belonging in your community. So some examples could be maybe age or religious groups, cultural, racial, or ethnic communities, any shared backgrounds, like maybe a shared language, maybe there's a lot of immigrants within your community from a specific place. All of those things could fit under cultural or historical interests. So for me, I've included that my community is really unique because I know it hosts a lot of different age groups. For example, in my community is the university, UNCW. So there's a lot of college students and recently graduated students who live in my community. Additionally, a lot of families live in my community that want access to the school districts of Hanover County. And then there's a lot of older people who retire to my community because they want to be near the beach or near the water. So those are some of the cultural historical interests of my community. Finally, I'm going to do other interests or concerns. This is basically just any problem that your community faces, or if you have some idea of what redistricting is or what kinds of districts have been drawn in the past, maybe that's something that you want to address in this box. For example, maybe your community was split up before, or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and put something in here. And I'm also seeing a question in the comments about if all 4 boxes have to be completed. No, they don't. So I'm only showing you all 4 boxes because I want you to kind of get an idea of what could go in each box. But you only have to complete 1 to finish the survey. So don't think that they have to stop and fill out every box. And it obviously takes quite a while to fill out each box well. So that's not something that has to happen. The reason that we actually have these survey questions is because we really want to guide people to thinking about their community before they actually get to the map. So give them some idea of what kinds of things they might want to think about when they actually start drawing the map. And also this information can be helpful for on the organization side and on the map drawer side to understand why it is that these people wanted to be put together in the first place, or what it is that binds them together. So for my last one, other interests and concerns, I just included that I don't think my community includes people in the historic downtown area or along the waterfront in landfall, because these people, I think, have different interests. They have different school districts, they have different malls and places that they go. And so I wouldn't consider that community to be a part of my community. So finally, we're gonna get to the 3rd step, which is just your community's name. You can name it whatever you want. I'm gonna name mine College Road Community because College Road is a road that goes through my entire community. It's pretty popular where I live. Okay, so now we're getting to the actual map itself. So drawing the map is something that is designed to be as accessible and easy as possible. And for this reason, you'll notice that the map drawing tool looks really similar to like a Google Maps or a GPS, like any type of those types of things that people use relatively frequently. So we hope that the format is pretty easy to understand because people tend to use these kinds of things to look for places. Additionally, it has the ability to search for locations just like you would on a regular kind of map or Google Maps using the search bar here. So we know not everyone is super familiar maybe with all the roads and street signs that are in their community, but if there are certain places that are landmarks of the community, that also makes it really easy to draw your map using this tool. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on my community. I'm going to start with, I mentioned, I think, my church. So I'm going to start with my church as one of the points of my community here. So as you can see, I can just look up the name of my church and it's going to zoom me right in to where my church is on this map. So you're seeing things being highlighted. Those are census block groups. And when you click on a census block group, you'll add it to a part of your map. If you decide you actually don't want that census block group anymore, you have the ability to erase it. You can also zoom in and out as well, like you would on a regular map. So I'm going to start drawing my community and just show you kind of my thought process. So this section here, this is about right around here is where my church is. So I want to include that part of my community. Another thing that I mentioned was the university. So the university is right here, as you can see. So I'm going to include these block groups in my community. One thing that is important to note is that your community does have to be contiguous, so it does have to connect. So you couldn't say, okay, I'm gonna put like this all the way over here and part of my community. It would have to like connect together in some way. So I'm just gonna keep going through. All of these are part of the university. So another place that I mentioned was the mall and the medical center. So right here is the medical center. The mall is in this area over here. So I'm going to include those things. And again, you're able to search. So for example, maybe I want to include my high school. I can search for my high school. And as you can see, I've actually already included it. It's right here in this block group. But if I was unfamiliar with the roads and didn't know exactly where that was, that would be something that I could do to locate it. So there's Longleaf Park, another thing that I mentioned, and some of the like bigger locations within your community or on the map of your like town will actually show up on this map, which will make it a little easier to find those landmarks as well. So I'm going to include this section here, Millbrook. That's actually where my house is. So I'm going to include this section as a part of my community here. And then as you can see, you can also kind of go about this thinking about boundaries. For example, this right here, this is 17th Street, and beyond 17th Street, I know that people go to different schools and they have different kind of they have different school districts, they have different grocery stores. I know that people are a little bit, I wouldn't consider that to be part of my community, so I can say, well, maybe along this road boundary, I'm not going to include the people that are past the street. Additionally, if you go down this way, you can see this one is Market Street. When you pass Market Street, you're going to downtown area. I don't really live downtown. I live kind of in a suburban area. So then maybe that's something that I wouldn't want to include. So you can look at these roads and also look at these kind of landmark locations as boundaries as well as places to include. Okay, so once I think that my map is good, I can zoom out, see what it looks like. And if I think, yep, that's about right, then I can go ahead and save it. One thing I didn't mention that I do want to mention is that, like I said, you're selecting block groups, but if you don't want to select like multiple block groups at a time, it's possible to just make this tool size smaller and then just select one group at a time, or make it bigger if you want to select a bunch of groups at a time, either way. So if I say, okay, this is about it, this is what I want my community to look like, then I can scroll down and click here to indicate that I've read these terms and agreements, and then save my community. Okay, and so once you save your community, it's going to take you to this page, which is going to thank you for your submission. You're also going to get this link here. This link is really important because as a user, you're able to share this link with others. So if you want to post it on your social media, send it in an email, however you want to use it, by using this link, you can share your map with other people. Additionally, if we click View Community, this is going to show you all of the information that you put in about your community in the survey. It's also going to zoom in and show you the map that you drew. So this is the map that I just drew for you guys here. Another thing that's interesting about this page is you'll be able to use data layers on top of it. So for example, if you want to look at, let's say, postcodes, it will draw the lines of the different postcodes that you've included in your community. Or if you want to see, for example, the census block groups that you've included, that's possible as well. And there's a bunch of different data layers that you can apply here. Finally, on this page, you're able to export your map. So if you want to export as a PDF, that's going to print out your map and also all of the survey information that you included. And you can print that out, email it, do whatever you'd like with that. Additionally, you can export it as a GeoJSON file. And what that's going to do is export it as like a map file. And then you can import that into mapping software. If you were someone who knew how to draw maps, you could do that as well. So before I move on to the organization aspect, I'm going to check the chat for any questions. I'll answer the ones in the chat first. Feel free to add some. And then if you want to just speak your question as well, that's totally fine. So I'm seeing where do the block groups come from? So these are census block groups. So it's coming directly from the census data. Can you see what others have done? So I guess I might need you to clarify your question there. So you can see your map, and if you send your map to someone, then you'll be able to see, everyone will be able to see your map. Additionally, organizations, which we'll talk about a little later, they can see everyone's map who submits the map to their map drive. So if you submit your map to an organization, that organization can see your map as well. Asking about census block groups, if they're different than precincts, they are different than precincts. Yeah, the census blocks are the smallest bit of data given to the states, and then we're actually using the block groups, which is like a little bit of a bigger unit than census blocks. Okay, is there a stage where it calculates the population of your community of interest? There is not. So we purposefully do not include demographic data when you're drawing the map, and we do that so you can really think about what your community might look like, just like without thinking about like the already drawn boundaries of your community. However, after you create your map, you do have the ability to, I guess, reference it with this block groups that you selected. And we're talking about including more demographic data specifically on the website itself. And if Kyle, you want to add anything to that? Nope. Okay, cool. Awesome. So then I guess I answered well.
Yeah, I may just jump in and answer one of these other questions as well, which is what year of census block groups are we using? And so the response to that is that we are using the census block groups from the 2010 census. However, once the 2020 census comes out with their own geographies, we will be switching to those. But that doesn't mean that communities drawn using Representable prior to when we get those census data layers out will not be usable by a commission or as a public input.
Yes, thank you, Kyle. And then finally, are there limitations on the geographic size of your community of interest? There are not limitations, I don't think. However, we have found that people using this tool tend to draw relatively small communities of interest. And another thing that's great to note here is that the community of interest, like I said, they're pretty small, so they wouldn't necessarily be a district onto themselves. Typically, these communities of interest would actually, there'd be multiple communities of interest within one district. And communities of interest tend to be, that people draw with this tool tend to be like 8 to 20 block groups. Okay, so if there are no more questions on this aspect, and there'll be more time for questions later, I'm going to quickly go over kind of the organizational aspects or organization view before I answer more questions. So let me show you guys here. So what you guys are looking at now is actually a test organization. So this is an example of what an organization's homepage or web page would look like. As you can see here, you're going to have a little bit of information in the top left about the community itself. Additionally, you'll have the ability to manage your membership, so you can add members onto your community who will have access to this page, or onto your organization who will have access to this page. And the most important thing about the organization aspect is the ability to create community mapping drives. So what community mapping drives are is essentially, it's kind of like a collection box or like a bin for you to put all of your maps in, right? So when you create a community mapping drive, and you can see there's some examples here, I'll click on this one so you can see what it might look like. When you create this drive, it's going to give you this link here. And this link is the link that you can send out to your community members, to your local organizations, to anyone you know who might be interested in drawing a map. You can send this link out, and when they use this link, the map that they draw is actually going to go, they'll be able to see it, but it's also going to be added to your mapping drive, so you'll be able to see it as well. So this kind of answers the earlier question about who can kind of see what you've done. If you submit your map to a mapping organization or map drive, the organization will be able to see what it is that you've done. So what this is going to look like is once they've submitted their maps, you'll be able to look at all of the maps within your mapping drive. So I'm going to kind of show you what that might look like here. As you can see, this is pretty similar to the page that a user would see once they've submitted their map, except there's way more maps. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on Greensboro, since this is Greensboro mapping drive, so you can kind of see the maps more clearly. So what we're looking at here is a bunch of maps. Some of them overlap, some of them don't, but all of these maps are maps that were submitted by users to this mapping drive. So as you can see, this is basically very similar to what we drew just as a user, except that you're seeing them all kind of in conversation with each other. So what you can do with this page, one, you can add data layers just like you could to your own personal map. So if you these are kind of big postcodes, or even congressional districts or state senate districts, whatever it is you'd like to see, it can overlap that data layer right on top of all of the maps that you've received, so you can see how they kind of agree with each other. For example, right now we're looking at state senate districts, and you can see like this little thing is circling some of these communities, but also cutting some of these communities up. Additionally, from this page, you can actually zoom in on the individual maps that were drawn. So for example, maybe I want to look at University District Greensboro. I could click on that here. It's going to zoom in on the map for me. All right, so you can see the map that was drawn by this user. You can also see the survey information that was included by this user. You can add data layers as well, and then of course you can export it as a PDF or as a GeoJSON file. And it's also important to note that you are able to export all of your maps to your mapping drive as a GeoJSON file. So if you wanted to, for example, draw a Unity map or attempt to create a district using this data, you'd be able to do that in any map drawing software, most map drawing softwares, by exporting it using this feature. Okay. So that is pretty much it for the live demo. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to this screen real quickly. We'll do questions and concerns, and then I'll put this email. If it hasn't already been put in the chat, I'll put this email in the chat, and this is a way that you can get in contact with the entire Representable team if for some reason we don't answer your question today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Are there any questions, concerns, feedback?
I've got a question for you. Have you tried the tool out in some very high density areas like New York City or, that sort of thing? Because I know I'm a demographer, so I know a lot about census blocks. And I know the census blocks in very high density areas often are portions of building. And how does your tool handle that sort of density?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, the block groups, like I said, we use block groups, but there is no like limit to the amount of block groups that you can choose. So if there was a situation where the block groups are really, really small, for example, in cities like New York City, that would also be possible it would be possible to select as many as needed to create your community. Also, I'll let Kyle speak more to the engineering part of this, but I do believe that the website has been designed to handle like large influxes of maps. So I wouldn't worry too much about density in terms of just how many people are in the area. The website is capable of handling high input. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll agree, and I'll add that in our testing we found that drawing community maps in very dense urban areas does work well for people. One of the advantages I think to using block groups is that standardized population between 600 to 3,000 people means that in a city that will often be just a block or two of like the city itself. But in rural areas, it will be much, much larger. So there's kind of a diversity of sizes geographically there.
Now, I also know, because I've worked with them so much, that some of the Black groups split our communities of interest. I know in the county where I live, for example, we have an apartment complex that is very large, and it's split into 3 Black groups. But the Black groups contain areas around the apartment complexes. Because Black groups have to follow certain rules, they have to follow physical boundaries as the edges of these. And I know where I live, we argued that they keep this apartment complex as its own Black group, but census rejected that. So there's some problems within even the Black group data that makes it hard sometimes for people to deal with it or use it. And I also know from working with committees trying to do similar things where they were trying to set up parameters or communities of interest. There are a lot of people out there that have trouble with maps and reading them. And I'm trying to think of ways to make it more user-friendly for folks that don't use maps very well. But I'm not coming to anything right away.
So, and that might be a group that we might want to reach out to in some way and invite them to look at this tool and see if they would like to use it to kind of define their community of interest. That's, I think, one of the things that this is developed for. Does that make sense, team?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea. I also think, kind of going to your point about maps, I definitely agree that maps are challenging for some people, and it's also not everyone has a lot of experience with like making their own. So that's why Representable is really working to make the tool really accessible and just like easy to understand. And so we hope that by using kind of more landmarks, being able to search for specific locations as opposed to just looking at streets, and kind of being able to zoom in on familiar areas, people will be able to kind of define where their community might be. That's another also a good reason Oh, yes. That's another reason that I think using block groups is helpful, because while smaller units may make it easier to define like very specific locations, it can also make it harder to kind of get to the point that you're trying to make. Whereas using the block groups, it kind of gives you, okay, this is like an area that I'm selecting. I think it makes it sometimes easier for people who don't have a lot of map experience to understand, okay, I'm just like kind of coloring in the places that I think are part of my community. I'm actually going to go ahead and answer. I have a couple questions in the chat, but again, feel free to add more questions in the chat or just speak. So I have here, will you be making your staff available for outreach and partnership, say with the League, to help citizens of Virginia understand how they can use it? Absolutely. The Representable team is here to help use this tool. So we're not just going to give it to you and say good luck. We're definitely going to work with you guys on how to use the tool and how you can spread it into the community. And again, the email that I put in the chat, if you have any questions or concerns or need more educational materials about it, we're always willing to help out with that as well. And then I have the community drew did not look compact. It might help to make it clear that this is to define a community, not draw the ultimate district. Yes, that's very important. So when you go on Representable, you're not drawing a district, and I did not actually draw anything big enough to be a district in North Carolina. It looked bigger than I think it was, because really that's actually only like a couple miles of my town. But I think that it is really important to note that these are communities of interest. They're different than districts. They're also usually much smaller than districts. And they're kind of used in conjunction with each other in order to create the entire district itself. And I have another question. Is there any data about how being shuttled from district to district lowers voter participation? I'm not totally sure. Again, that was a quote that I read from an article that I thought was really prevalent or really important to this discussion. But I do think it would be really interesting to find out if there is any data. I know that in North Carolina, and this is more just a general sense of things as opposed to an actual data point, but I do know in my state that there was a lot of talk about disenfranchisement and how even though we're a swing state, it seems like voters don't always have all the power that they should. So that was something that was mentioned. Oh, and Julia has something to say.
I just wanted to provide, to talk about two things briefly. One is just to give an anecdote. In my professional life, in my early career, we were doing a geographic spectrum auction, and we looked at census blocks also because they are the smallest available data point that has census information associated with it, essentially. And so when you want to build a map, it's like it's taking it to its most granular. If you want to have any info that you can provide the public. We ultimately went with a larger size because those companies weren't interested in the really small blocks. But I just think it's to reassure people that y'all went small, and that's good. So that to give people as much flexibility as you could while still being able to give them information about the little building blocks that you're letting them use. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was just circling back again to, I think it was Sarah's question, and Michaela, you answered it really well about, you know, what you have drawn is not a district, it's a community of interest. But I just want to loop back and remind people that the commission is going to draw the districts. And so the people of Virginia, we get to draw our communities, and then they take that into account. And the statute and the law basically sort of say two things that the commission will have to balance. Basically, they have to respect communities of interest, but at the same time, they're going to have to draw districts that are legal, meaning they are not packing or cracking minority group communities. And so when we draw our communities of interest, it helps them make sure that they are not gerrymandering. And so that's what this exercise is all about. It's community driven. So that's pretty awesome. Anyway, back to you, Michaela. Thank you.
Right, Julia, I was going to say, because that's kind of answering to Anne's question. I think the communities of interest, you know, some of the examples that were shown, they've either been cracked or packed into different districts, and that leads to gerrymandering, which leads to voter disenfranchisement. So indirectly, yes, I think this tool can work, you know, help us to prevent the packing and cracking if we can submit this to the commission.
Right, and that also gets to the point that you mentioned yesterday, Chris, about how it would be great if people can mention to people in other communities, whether it's your church group or your local, various clubs or community organizations. They don't have to be local, they could be statewide or national, but to get the word out.
Mhm. Are there any other questions? If you want to unmute yourself, you can ask one directly, and then we'll close up soon. Or you can put it in the chat if you'd rather.
Yeah, this is Ann Cantor. Is the point here that the Virginia Commission is going to use you, or is the point here that we want to make representable something that the Virginia Commission should become aware of? I mean, I can't imagine the commission has been set up at all, so it's not really using this material or even in any way to even recognize that it exists. I mean, the programs, recognize the programs. What's the point here? What are we taking away? What's our walk away here?
Okay, thank you. So anyway, I'm going to thank all of you again for coming. Our primary objective today was to introduce you to the tool and to the idea of drawing a community of interest. We would love to have groups all over Virginia drawing their communities. And these would then be submitted to the commission to consider. And whether it could be in written form as well as in testimonials, and say, this is my community of interest. You know, right now it's split into 3 different districts. That doesn't allow us to, vote as a group for people that we want to vote. So we want people to draw their maps. The commission itself is not going to draw communities of interest maps. They're going to draw districts. But one of the criteria that they have to pay attention to is community of interest that people tell them about. So what we would like you to do is to turn around and tell your other league members in your community about this tool and about the idea of, hey, maybe we should look into drawing a map for our community of interest or several communities of interest within our geographic area.
Is league members a community of interest?
Well, it could be. I mean, your local league certainly is a community of interest, right? You are geographically connected, and you may be culturally connected as well. But then the other thing is to reach out to other community groups that you might know. So for example, your civic federations, maybe you belong to a church. Like Michaela said, a church was a big part of her community. So church groups may want to talk about this and maybe be introduced to the tool. It could be your local NAACP groups. It could be an Indivisible group. What else? It could be your PTAs. Whatever group there might be in your community who wants to get involved can certainly use this tool or any others that might be out there. And Representable is available to do some training. We hope to set up a few in January where we can invite any interested individuals or organizations to join so they could come to something very similar to what we have today, where they would be introduced to the tool, they would have connections to it, and they can start doing their own drawing of communities' interest. Let's see, what else did I forget?
So Chris, just it also might be helpful to mention that we will also be introducing league members to another tool as well. We're not, we're not like promoting Representable per se. What they provide is a very helpful, product. There's another product out there that we will also mention, but it's free. It's not. They're making it. They're an academic organization making it available to the public, which is wonderful. For use because they do believe in fair redistricting, which is great. But what this is really about is trying to help make sure that voters are not disenfranchised.
Right. And we can also, they are also willing and able to provide a train-the-trainer type of session for anybody who might be interested in going deeper into their tool. And then you can turn around and train groups in your area as well, or your local chapter, local league members, if you wanted to do that. So, we'll probably be sending out a questionnaire or an email. I'll send out the email saying, if you're interested in that, we can try and schedule one. But so for right now, turn around, talk to people about it, go to their website, explore the tool, look at the maps, look in Michigan since they've worked there, look in North Carolina since they have some maps drawn there, and take a look at what people have done. And I guess you could try and create your own community of interest map, but then you can delete it later, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You can create as many maps as you want, and if you want to delete them, you can do that as well.
Yeah. So if you want to play around with it, I think that's another thing that you can do. So does that raise any more questions or? Okay. All right, well, I guess thank you again for coming. We're thrilled that so many of you came to find out more about this. The other thing is we want to keep, the big fight is over in terms of we got the amendment passed, so everything is moving forward, but there's still work to be done. And we want you and your friends and your neighbors to keep watching what happens with the commission and keep watching this process and be involved. And this is one way to get involved. And we'll keep you informed as to, you know, the timelines in terms of when they schedule their public hearings and how and when they will collect this input from us. Okay, so thank you, everybody.
Great questions, everyone. Thank you for taking us through this, Chris and Michaela. This was, yeah, really informative, as Faith just said in the comments. Thanks.
Any last minute questions? The team can hang on for a couple minutes if you want to throw it out there. But everybody take care. Let's see, let me save the chat before I forget. So thanks, Kyle and Michaela and Jason. This is great. Thank you so much for your time and expertise.
Yeah, and thank you all for setting this up.
All right,
We'll
enjoy
talk
the rest
soon.
of your, it feels like a Sunday today to me. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday.
We have a few more days, I
We'll
guess,
see.
to get through, Chris. We're gonna be good.
I think that's what it
Almost
is,
there,
or
almost
something, yeah.
there.
All right, take care, everybody.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye,
You're
y'all.
amazing.